Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we are having our monthly check-in with Colorado Workforce Development Council. I have in studio with me Britta Blodgett, Senior Communications Strategist for CWDC. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Alex?
Fantastic. Thank you. It is a beautiful holiday week, so everyone, I think most of us have tomorrow off, so I'm really looking forward to that. But you guys have some exciting stuff coming up. I feel like Colorado Workforce Development Council really gets their pace going in the summertime.
You know, it doesn't really slow down, which always keeps things fun. Some of our partners have some exciting things going on as well, too. In July, the 16th through the 18th in Colorado Springs, the Colorado Community Action Conference is happening. One of our partners, and also in late August 27th in Vail, the Think Big conference is taking place. And that is a conference that's focused on youth and people who serve youth. So that's a good one as well. We've had some retail sector partnerships launch across the state, which is exciting, new partnerships growing and expanding. And then we also just had our quarterly TalentFOUND quarterly conversations, and the most recent ones focused on workforce development and community and technical colleges. So it was a really great opportunity to learn more about the exciting partnerships and work that is happening all across the state. The most recent one was more focused on rural communities, and that conversation took place in Salida, which is always a treat to go to Salida in the summer.
Right, it's a beautiful background
Yes.
to have a great conversation in.
Yes. And so today, we're excited to talk about the mature workforce. And in Colorado, in 1990, 11% of the workforce was made up of individuals 55 or older. In 2010, that number grew to 19%. And by 2030, it's projected to be 23%. So this is something a trend that things are changing. And so we feel like this is an important topic to talk about. So we are excited to have Phil and Karen here with us today to discuss it further.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I, for one, was really excited to talk about this. I know we talk a lot about ensuring people are ready for the workforce, but having space for people that have been in the workforce for a while is also super important.
And the way things are, it's not just continuing the way that it was. So as things are changing, how can we best meet individuals' needs and meet the needs of the economy too? So
fantastic.
We would love for you all to introduce yourselves and a little bit about your organization. Can we start with you, Phil, please?
Sure. Thank you for having us today. My name is Phil Nash. I'm Executive Director of Boomers Leading Change, which is a 9-year-old organization that was founded based on the concept that the baby boom generation is not going to age and retire in the same fashion as our parents and grandparents' generation. Baby boomers have really benefited from some of the very best of society because we grew up in an era with a high investment in public education, a high investment in higher education, and in a very prosperous time in the middle of the last century. And so we come to the traditional age of retirement with better health, better education, lots and lots of good work experience. Especially women in the baby boom generation have really been able to thrive much more than women of previous generations in the professional and work environment. So we just believe that there is so much talent in the older adult population that this talent can be redirected in our later years to solve social and economic problems and address things with the talents and the assets that we bring.
Absolutely.
And I'm Karen Brown. I am actually the past chair, current member of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging. I actually played a role in actually helping that come to be. It is a 23-member governor-appointed task force charged with creating a comprehensive strategic action plan on aging to the year 2030. Covers a very broad range of categories, but one of those key topics is workforce. When we actually created the Workforce Committee in that very first year in 2015, we focused on two different factors. One, ensuring there was adequate workers to help the older population, as well as ensuring there was an opportunity for older workers to stay connected to and earning money in the workforce. That is one of the only committees that has actually continued through the entire term of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging. That's kind of a broad overview. We actually have 23 members on the commission, very diverse population. This is a big issue for the entire group of people on the task force.
Nice.
Wonderful. Phil, you are also a member of the Colorado Workforce Development Council. Could you tell us a little bit about both your role as the executive director and what that entails, and your role as a council member, and how those might impact one another?
I was asked to consider becoming a member of the Workforce Development Council. I'm a very new member. I've only attended 2 meetings so far. But I got asked to be on the Workforce Development subcommittee of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging. And that group is really wrestling with the issues that Karen just talked about, and felt that there ought to be a voice for the older worker on the council. So I was asked to apply for that, and I was accepted and appointed by Governor Hickenlooper last fall. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to get to know a lot better, a much bigger picture of the workforce landscape here in Colorado and all of its many facets, and also very proud to kind of bring the perspective of the older worker to the conversations. And I would like to say that there is a task force that is being formed at the council to deal with the older adult worker, and we are going to be holding monthly meetings to kind of review the data and begin developing an action plan at the council level to talk about the older adult worker and how the older adult worker can bring value to Colorado employers.
Great.
Well, and I want to piggyback on that if I can, because how Phil's position came to be, or that specific spot, was really one of the recommendations of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging. Several of the people on the Workforce Committee had numerous meetings within CWDC. We'd actually had an opportunity to meet with the authors of the Talent Pipeline Report. And in looking at that report, at least historically, it tends to skew a little bit towards the younger population. So we really felt it was important to connect with CWDC, with all those people connected to the Talent Pipeline Report, website, et cetera, to really raise the level of awareness that, you know what, we have a huge population that is going to be a part of the solution towards aging. So that's really kind of a part of how that position came to be, is a recommendation, and through the governor and the senior advisor on aging, it came to actually fruition. So
yes, and I think we did end up, based on these suggestions, we ended up including a section in the 2017 Talent Pipeline Report that specifically focuses on that population. So I think having a diverse set of council members really is so important to bring all of these different perspectives to the work. That workforce is not just, as we talk about on many shows, it's not just you go to elementary school, you go to middle school, you go to high school, you go to college, and then you have a job forever. There are so many different pathways.
So many different pathways, and changing careers, especially after the age of 55, right? A lot of people are starting to do that. There's different industries anymore, and so it's exciting to see. There definitely needs to be a space for focusing on the senior population in the workforce.
Well, and I think one of the things, I don't know if any of you have actually, there's a chart that's been put out there. There's this little chart. Yeah. It shows population in 1960 versus 2060. Wow. And what's interesting is it changes from a pyramid in 1960, where many of the population were younger people, to now into 2060, it'll be a pillar. So we'll have the same number, basically, of all ages. So our strategy historically about how we recruit people won't work, because there aren't going to be enough younger people. I mean, if you've taken a look at the birth rate over the last 32 years, we are at the lowest birth rate in 32 years. In Colorado, I think it's 1.8 children per couple. And so you can't replace the workforce as you did in the past. So I think that this is a really amazing opportunity, given that we now can tap all 5 generations, and that now becomes our talent pipeline. It is no longer just that 25 and under population. At least that's how I'm pitching it.
And I think I like to set a context with a statistic that's really pretty startling, and that is that science tells us that any child, of all the children that are born after 2007, 1 out of every 2 will live to 100 years old.
Wow.
And if we think about the lifespan, think about how long it seems to have lived between the ages of 20 and 60. You probably have not lived that long, but I have. 20 to 60 is a long time. 60 to 100 is the same amount of time. When you're 60, you're at the halfway point of your adult life. And we don't have policies in place that are sustainable for a population change that dramatic. And that's going to happen with the children that are now going to elementary school and even entering middle school at this point. They need to be looking at careers that are perhaps 60 years long in order to live. And we have to adapt to that kind of reality because it's not economically sustainable for our society or the economy or for those people to stop working halfway through your adult life.
Right. Exactly.
Well, and if you think about it, in 1935, when Social Security was designed, the average age of a woman was 63 years old. The average age of a man was about 59. Maybe they lived to 60. Retirement was 62.
Yeah.
So you mostly died before you retired, or you lived just a couple of years. So you wanted to take what few years you had to really be able to enjoy it. Now, as Phil just pointed out, we live 20 years. The average age is more like 82, 83. So we're going to live 20 years longer. Many people will live 30 or 40 years longer. I mean, that philosophy just doesn't work in the 21st century. So we really have to look at how do we evolve, how we really address quote unquote retirement, and what is our work life and that talent pipeline.
Yeah. I think all of us would like to retire at 30. It's just not really feasible, right?
We do need a workforce. Yes.
Well, I would just chime in and say that we see people at Boomers Leading Change. We're an organization that really is a channel for older adults to come in and become mostly part of the volunteer workforce. That's what they're looking for. But for many of these people, volunteering is part of the pathway back into the workforce. They're learning something new, and we have anecdotally many stories of people who have gotten back into employment. But we were talking a little bit before we started taping about the factors. One of the factors in people returning to the workforce after they retire is a sense of isolation. Mm-hmm. One of the things that is really understated and misunderstood in our society is that the workplace is a community. For many people, it's much more of a community than the neighborhood. It's kind of supplanted what the neighborhood used to be. And so retiring is great, you think, but you may not realize you're leaving a community, whether you love the people you work with or you didn't like all of them. Nonetheless, it's a place to go every day and get caught up on other people's lives and share your life. And when you take that away, it's a big gap. Yeah. So we have people coming our way who say, I've been retired for 6 months and I'm going stir crazy. And I can only watch so many reruns of the Golden Girls before I am, going out of my skull with boredom.
Now, I could watch Golden Girls all day, but I totally understand that isolation, and it is a community. You spend typically 40 hours a week with these people. That's a lot of your life to spend with people, and then to just cut it all off, it's a little tough. And especially at that point, your kids typically are out of the home already, and it's not like you've got a family to take care of at home a lot when you reach that retirement age too. So you're right, it's got that great social aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also wondering if you all could share how you became engaged in this issue. Obviously, it's complex and there are lots of different facets to it, but how did this become an issue that was important to you?
Well, for me, actually, my background is oil and gas. So I'm a geoscientist by training, MBA in finance, environmental science, and engineering. So that's not a natural overlap with aging. But I was also a caregiver for 8 years. And after having been a caregiver for 8 years, I recognized some of the amazing challenges we have in that industry, as well as a lack of advocates. I mean, and actually, one of the big drivers of getting into the industry on aging was really a function of that other piece of workforce, not having adequate workers to help care for older people. My mother, in probably 8 years, had more than 8 dozen. That's like 90 plus caregivers.
Wow.
That's a lot of caregivers. It was a revolving door back then. And all I could think is, oh my gosh, there were not enough caregivers then. And then I actually thought, it really doesn't matter if we have enough caregivers because most older people haven't saved enough money. So I really felt like I had to get involved and really get involved on the tech side. So I really got involved and, helped promote SOPCA. But I also got involved after having been involved with SOPCA in an organization called Changing the Narrative. And we actually have an effort called Age-Friendly Workforce, the business case for an age-friendly workforce. And it came about because when we were doing our conversations about changing the narrative, really how we talk about, treat, and act towards older people, we had people come up afterwards saying, you know what, I actually left the workforce at 40, care for kids, having a hard time getting back in. I got laid off, older person, I'm having a hard time getting back in, whatever the case may be. And we recognized that we needed to create the case for the business community about the value of really being involved in hiring older people. So I kind of got involved in it from a couple different angles.
And I am the kind of baby boomer that was active in social justice movements going back to the late 60s when I was in college, and for me this engagement is based on a social justice principle that everyone should be able to contribute to their fullest extent to our society and to our economy. And creating the pathways for all my life, I've been involved one way or another, either in paid work or as a volunteer, in efforts to improve social justice in our society. And at this stage of my life, as an older person, I'm fighting for the ability of older people to contribute to their fullest extent, because cutting off that ability to make that contribution is an injustice. So that's what motivates me.
And it also seems to be sort of a lose-lose, especially in a time where our unemployment rate is so low that this is an undertapped population that has a lot of experience and skills. So if we can better tap into that population, leverage their skills, it is a win both for the individuals to be able to continue to contribute and for the economy to help grow that workforce that it needs.
I completely agree. I think that when two things happen when you decide to retire. Number one, you stop making your own personal economic contribution to our economy. And number two, you start drawing resources from that economy your way. So if you can postpone the point at which people tap into Social Security or Medicare because they continue to be employed and benefiting their employer. We can't go into this believing that the economy owes something to older people. Pragmatically speaking, businesses they're there to make a profit, and contributed talent helps the people who are running the business or own the business make a profit. So we need to be smart about how we talk about this. But we're not asking employers to do something out of the goodness of their hearts for older people out of pity or sympathy. It's asking them to recognize their own self-interest by making reducing ageism in the workplace in various manners, but also make the investment in these older workers in training and HR policies that are more age friendly, as Karen's initiative is working toward.
And what are some of the items with that initiative that you are specifically trying to address?
You know, one of the things, I mean, this is we made a 4-page brochure that we put together. Part of what we really do is go in and dispel some of the myths that exist around, you know, what are the challenges with an older worker? I mean, they are tired, they don't know tech, they're not dedicated. I mean, we've actually done research, and there are more than 30 or 40 different references on the back that really help people understand, you know what, those are misperceptions, and that might be something from decades ago, but it doesn't exist today. When we talk about, you know, different things that could be done, you know, there's a study done by Transamerica, and what they really talk about is kind of what Phil says. Boomers are reinventing what our older work life might look like, and I wouldn't even call it retirement. It's like just our older work life. You know, if you look at there's a study called the CASOA. It's a Colorado Assessment of Senior Adult Needs here in Colorado. They actually show that 70 to 80% of older people expect to work past 65 years old. I mean, that's a huge proportion. So again, what we're trying to do is figure out, how do we really engage these people? Part of it is this whole advent with the gig economy. I think that we're going to see, not just for the younger population, but for the older population as well, the opportunity to be involved in part-time work, seasonal work, gig project work. There's a company, actually, it was an article in the Denver Business Journal, and it's a recruiting firm, and they recruit for legal talent. And they've actually created the Distinguished Legal Advisor Program. And what it does is it focuses on nothing but retired attorneys who have kept their credentials, and they connect with corporations. And corporations are able to actually tap into project work, mentorship, support to connect their younger people, and help at about half the price of what a full-time employee would be. It's perfect for the retiree. It's working great for the corporation. And she said, I spoke with a woman, and she said, it's just going gangbusters. It's an unbelievable market for this. So I actually think we're going to find a great market for this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I know within the public workforce system in Colorado, too, that a number of the local workforce centers are focused on, they'll have classes or trainings specific to the older workforce, and I think are trying with businesses to help dispel some of these myths that you talk about, but also provide a little bit of additional training on some of those places where it might help address concerns of the business or make the job seeker feel more confident or provide them with the skills that they need as well. So I know that that is another place where this topic is definitely being addressed.
There were actually 2 special programs that AARP has endorsed. One is the Back to Work 50 Plus. The other is the Senior Community Service Employment Program. Both do exactly what you have described, really prepare the older person to re-engage or be tech savvy, mm-hmm. or further educated. So, and there are more programs being developed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I would also just point out that when you look at the older adult workforce, maybe a way of shifting our thinking a little bit about how to treat or how to address the older adult workforce, making transitions to other kind of work, is to look at the other end of the spectrum. Young people work part-time. They have internships. They have fellowships, seasonal work. And it's, so if we just look at the other end of the spectrum and how people develop their careers and get to that first, entry level, before they get to their first entry-level job, professional job or full-time job, they've gone through maybe 7 or 8 years of working part-time and learning through internships and so forth. Is there a way of adapting that pipeline model to the older workers?
Yeah, that's an interesting subject to bring up. I we'll actually want to address that in the second half of the show. So stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. We're going to be right back continuing this conversation with the Colorado Workforce Development Council. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we are having a fascinating conversation here with the Colorado Workforce Development Council. Britta Blodgett is joining me, and we also have in studio Phil Nash and Karen Brown. I am loving this conversation. I'm not gonna lie. I think we took a great turn here at the end in talking about how workforce is changing. We mentioned a little bit on the break of continued education.
Yeah, I think building on Phil's point that you don't just have a job for 30 years anymore. Really having that approach of continuous lifelong learning is important. And if you start that at an early age and continue that throughout your career, it will help you evolve and develop a variety of skills, which will offer you more flexibility and more options, and also provide a more skilled workforce as well. So I think it really aligns with the other initiatives that aren't necessarily specific to the mature workforce, but are across the whole spectrum.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the workforce is changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know another aspect of this is not just the ensuring that older adults have access to work, but then also replacing people who are retiring, and there are a number of industries for which this is going to be an issue in the coming years. Do you all have specific strategies on addressing these shifts, or what concerns do you also have?
Well, I referenced the Transamerica study that was done in 2017, and it's really interesting because I like the approach that they take. They really talk about, the old days, retirement was 65, you stop, that's it, no more work. They really, prescribe and talk about conversations they've had with employers and older people saying, it's going to be phased retirement. So as opposed to saying, I'm retiring at 65, maybe you say, I'm thinking 70 is when I ultimately want to leave this company. And maybe for the first 2 years, you work in a 25 or 30 hours a week. The next 2 years, you work on a project basis. And the last year is maybe just sort of an hourly rate, so that you actually do it very gradually. This works really well for the older person and for the employer. He has access to this institutional knowledge, the wisdom and the mentorship to be able to connect with the younger population, bring them up to snuff, and so they fully understand. So I think that's one of the things that's really going to be beneficial. And I think that there are even some amazing things happening in the startup communities that will really help the older population, because, we talk about, but then we lose all those benefits. There's a company here in Colorado called Opolis, and really what it does is it combines gig work, and as a result of combining that gig work, they actually provide benefits because they have a mass population and can provide insurance and those kinds of things. So again, we're on the early parts of what's happening, but I think amazing things are going to happen. So again, this whole concept of phased retirement, I think, will be a big thing for some of those industries that are really most concerned because they have a huge proportion of older people working with them.
I would say that one of the things that we need to look at, we're so embedded in the system that we have that we're not thinking out, or employers, human resource folks really aren't thinking outside the box. In fact, what we have is a system right now that rewards people for leaving. And if we start thinking about ways of incentivizing people for staying through flexible work, or through gigs, or through even intrapreneurship, utilizing your experience and knowledge of the business or institution where you work to come up with new stuff. If we just stop incentivizing people leaving and start incentivizing people for staying, that would help a lot. The other thing, I think, and Karen can probably address this more intelligently than I can, because I think she's looked at it, or her initiative has looked at it more, but it's the value of the intergenerational workplace. With 5 generations now working side by side in the workplace, you have a lot of power there that may not be getting tapped very well. And so what an older adult can bring to all of this, young people have a lot of anxiety. Are they gonna be successful? Are they gonna stay cutting edge? Are they going to make enough money to start a family or buy a home or all of that, or continue their education? Older adults can say, I've been in your shoes. You don't need to really worry about it that much. Just show up and work hard every day. Do your best, and things will be fine. One of the things that I often say to folks is that, regarding older adults and something that we bring, you can train for skills, you can train for computer literacy, you can train for new technology, you can train for a different kind of customer service. You can't train for work ethic, you can't train for resiliency, you can't train for the eye of experience that older adults bring. And it's a tremendous asset that I think is greatly undervalued, especially when you think in the context of an intergenerational workplace where all different generations bring something different to the table.
But actually, I think that's a really good point, because that is one of the things we specifically talk about, is that whole intergenerational component. We actually referenced Jean Galloway, who's a long-time Colorado leader in the business community, knows so many people, but she has actually taken a conscious approach to really engaging all of the generations in her work. And because she believes that brings great value, she is able to get better ideas, serve her clients in a much better way. So it's a conscious attempt to really engage all the generations. I can actually point to a couple of specific examples. I mean, last year I worked with, when I was the chair of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging, we had a younger person working with us. I have to tell you that the dynamics were just amazing, because I could bring some of the skills and expertise of different projects and work I'd done, and he could bring what's the latest thing from academia, what's the latest thing that the younger population are thinking. So that intergenerational component, I think, is a great value for all businesses, and not just one or the other, but really all of those different things.
Well, and I think the importance of talking to people who are in this position to understand what they need and what they want, because I know with the work that the council has done focused around youth, again, if it's just a bunch of adults talking about what they think youth want or need, it's important to bring their voice in, and conversely, actually talking to the people for whom this impacts their lives, and really understanding their perspective on how does it fit in, what do they need, what do they want.
Well, I read a recent article. I think it's the Great Generational Shift. And it was done by the Rainmakers. And they really talk about, we hear all this conversation about how all the different generations want something really different. But the millennials really have this strong component of flexibility and hours and work and clothing. And actually, this article that was done in 2019 basically said we are all millennials, if that's the perspective today. Because you know what? The millennials were gutsy enough, or had the right environment to be able to ask those questions. We didn't grow up with that, but now that we see it can be done, we're onto it. It's like, hey, so we all want flexibility for our life. We all want, whether it's flex hours, flex location, that chance to really, have a work-life balance. Mm-hmm. I actually want to mention another recruiting firm. It's called WAVE, WHVE, and it's actually, I think, a new direction that we may be seeing. It's really focused on the older generation, and it's all work from home. It's a completely virtual office. They have 38 reps across the United States, and their employees are all across the United States and all over 65 years old. All the recruiting is done blind. So when you actually go to hire them, you don't know what their age is. They could be 65, they could be 75, they could be 82. But 60% of the people are working full-time, the other 40% project. So I think that this will be not just for the older population, but I think for our entire workforce. We're going to see more of these kinds of things happening that addresses flexibility for all.
And that actually, one of the questions I had is, I know looking at the demographics of Colorado and the way populations are changing, I think that this is especially going to be an issue in more rural areas or certain parts around the state. So are there ways that we can address this both locally and statewide? And I think remote work is certainly something that could be done, but do you know of other things, or do you have approaches to contrast sort of across the state versus at a local level?
I really wish I had a better answer for you. I do think, I grew up in a rural community, and I understand. I think we really need to take a look at some of these rural communities and what they're doing with and for older adults, because they may be ahead of us in some ways. I personally just recently lost an uncle who his family wanted contributions to the local area or local commission on aging as memorials to him. So I went and looked it up. This is in my community where I grew up, and I looked to see all the things that they had going on for older adults, and I was astonished. They had Tai Chi classes, and this is a little community of 10,000 people. They had congregate meal sites at different places. They had music programs. They had transportation programs. I think some of these rural communities are doing a better job of addressing the needs of older adults than maybe we are in some of our urban environments. I don't make an assumption. I live part-time in a rural part of Colorado. I spend my weekends in Park County, which is one of the most rural communities in the state, or at least in the mountain state, or in the mountain part of Colorado. And there are all kinds of things going on, bingo and swap meets and just all kinds of community events. And people stay connected because they feel like they need to. As far as workforce is concerned, I think that it really is a larger issue of how do you make these communities more I want to say culturally and socially desirable, so that people want to be there. And that is, you can't slice out the workforce piece or the entrepreneurial piece and take it as a single entity. You have to think holistically about how rural communities can develop. So it was very interesting at the last meeting of the Workforce Development Council that I attended in La Junta. They had speakers come in and talk about everything they're doing in La Junta to generate more excitement in their downtown area and to provide more services to the people who live in the surrounding rural communities, and to connect with all the other small communities around there to do different things. And La Junta could be a real model for how workforce development is being done, but as an integral part of complete holistic community development.
Alex, you had mentioned that the Colorado Business Roundtable focuses a little bit on policy. Yeah. To the whole concept of actually being able to do remote work. I think Colorado passed legislation on broadband 2 years ago. In a very non-judgmental way. I was incredibly disappointed with what we passed. It did not meet the FCC standards, and this isn't, like having better broadband all across the state will allow people to work virtually, connect through meetings and all those kinds of things. So I think that at a policy level, really broadening our broadband would really help that not just for workforce, but even applies towards healthcare. The chance that you could do specialist visits remotely, but be able to transfer, x-rays and those kinds of things are really, really important. So I think that's a big issue across the state for so many different parts, not just for the older workforce, healthcare, et cetera, that, improvement could occur in that route. And I'd be glad to talk more about that.
And I think I did see an article recently about the progress that has been made on that, but obviously we are continuing as a state to work on that.
Well, it's all about money, and we just don't have that much.
Transportation is another issue that really is critical to the rural workforce, and it's not just the availability of buses and so forth, it's actually roads. And we talk about this a lot here in Colorado, and that is the need for greater investment in our highway system and our bridges and upkeep and maintenance and so forth. It makes all the difference between choosing to work or choosing not to work. It's a different kind of problem in the rural areas than it is in the urban areas. You hear many people now say, I actually had somebody in my office who said she had to leave the job because she could not bear to commute through Denver traffic every day. She found a job where it was a much shorter commute and she could do it on back streets. So transportation, whether it's urban or rural, is a major concern for older adults.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've touched on this a little, but I'm wondering what other opportunities you see to creatively address some of these issues. I think the examples you were giving around potentially looking at more rural communities, or being very intentional about bringing multiple generations together. Do you have other approaches?
One of the things I do want to mention, there are a couple of different programs that are called age-friendly employers. You can be certified as an age-friendly employer. So there are two different ways. One is through the AARP. They actually have an employer's pledge program. You fill out a form and you pledge to do certain things, and you really connect with somebody at AARP, and they kind of guide you through it. The age-friendly employer is a program offered through, I think it's retirement jobs, and they actually vet the companies to assess whether or not they are age-friendly, and then they create a website. And so if somebody is older looking for a job, they actually can identify companies that have been that we know are friendly towards the older population and that are welcoming and really are looking at, hey, project, gig, part-time, full-time, whatever the case may be. So I think those are things, and we're actually looking here in Colorado through the Age-Friendly Workforce Initiative of trying to figure out how do we craft something like that here in Colorado so that we can bring in that business community, help them become, kind of assess and help them become age-friendly and tap into a lot of amazing talent. In the state of Colorado, we have an incredibly educated task force. I think 40% of our task force has got a bachelor's from college. That's much higher than other states. So even on the tech sector, you could actually look at doing some training with these people and convert them into other industries. And the last thing I would point to is what Phil pointed out, like the internship programs. I don't know if anybody saw the movie The Intern. There's actually a movie about internships and how an older fellow applies for an internship. You know what? As it turned out, of course, it's a movie and it's supposed to end happy. He was a great resource for the young CEO entrepreneur. So I think that we should be looking at internship programs that really look at how do we create awareness through AARP, send it out to their 650,000 members here in the state of Colorado, and say, hey, we're hiring for a partial paid or stipend paid internship that could lead to part-time work. So I think there's a lot of creative opportunities, but we really need to connect with the business community to really talk a little bit more and give them some of these examples.
And I think work-based learning does connect with that continuous lifelong learning. Lifelong learning doesn't necessarily mean going back and getting another degree. It could be a work-based learning such as an internship.
Well, I also think it goes right down to the heart of who we are as individuals. And one of the most important things that you do when you're a community organizer is to help people overcome their internalized sense of what it means to grow older. That people come to this, if you have always had kind of a negative idea about older people or your own aging process, when you get to the point where you are over 60 or are older, you might really not like yourself very much because you've never really liked older people, or you've been afraid of getting older. And so part of what Boomers Leading Change is all about is help change the mindset within every single person about what their potential is. If you have been told that 65 is the stopping point and you're 65, you may think, well, that's an automatic stopping point. I hear this from people at 65. I hear it when people turn 70 and still working. It's like a big transition, but it's all in their head. And we need to get into people's heads and let them know that, you might live to 100. How do you want to live? How do you want to live the next 30 or 40 years? And once you're in the room where you start talking about these kinds of personal transformations on how you think about your own aging, it changes. The light goes on, and people are energized and motivated to go out and take another look at what they might be able to accomplish as part of their legacy.
Because it's not as though there's a switch that flips at 65, but somehow we've sort of been set up to perceive that that's the case.
Completely artificial turning point. And, one of the things that I often talk about is retiring the word retirement. It is not indicative of what people do these days. So I left full-time work for the first time at age 60, and I called myself rebalanced after that because I did consulting. I went back, I audited some classes at Metro. I traveled some more than I usually did. Then I went back to work full-time a few years later, which is where I am now. Now, I'm no longer rebalanced, but
You're unbalanced.
But I was never retired. And perhaps maybe someday retirement will apply to me, but I don't see that in my near future. So if we just get rid of the word and start using different kinds of language, we might be able to transform the world a little bit that way.
No, language definitely influences things and is important. I think that's a wonderful point. I really like it. So in our last few minutes here, I'm wondering what you all would like to share with businesses, things that they might not know about this population that you think it would be great for them to keep in mind.
Well, I will say Boomers Leading Change is an organization that there are 10 people who work at this organization. Only 2 of us are full-time. I think that a lot of employers are concerned about, well, if the person isn't there every day, how's the work going to get done, and so on and so forth. Well, that's what I live every day. I mean, people work different shifts, different hours. Sometimes they move their time from early in the week to later in the week as their life or as the work demands. So I would say to employers, if you're concerned about having flexibility in the workplace, just ease up on that notion. It can work, and the people who are doing the work assume that they're professionals and they're going to get their job done, regardless of whether they're there at 5 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the evening or working at home. And flexibility in the workplace is just something that it can be done because I'm doing it as the manager of my workplace. I would also say, before I came here, I was looking for resources online. There's an organization called the Society for Human Resource Management, short SHRM, SHRM. If you go to shrm.org, and you search for older adults, they have a wealth of information about how human resource managers can deal with an aging workforce. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was instead of an exit interview, they have stay interviews. How are we going to get you to stay? Which could actually be a tool to retain talent that you need to get to make your business healthy and thriving. So.
And I would say that most employers in the state of Colorado know, again, that we have a really talented pool all the way across the talent pipeline, and whether it's from 18 to 65. Talented pool, a lot of older people, many have not saved a lot of money, they need to work. Many also want to continue working, so I think it's a great opportunity. There are opportunities for, again, this gig economy, job sharing. I think we just need to really create the dialogue, provide some great examples for the industry, and they can certainly reach out to us, and we'll give them whatever information we have. Like we did put together this cheat sheet, which we are sharing actually right now with Chambers of Commerce as we do presentations.
Wonderful to hear. Thank you all so much. This was such a lovely conversation. I for one, learned a lot today, and I appreciate that. You can find all of the resources that we talked about today in the description below, so be sure to click on that link. You can find this podcast and more at cobrt.com/radio-podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.